Introduction, before you turn the first page. This book is going to make you uncomfortable. Not in the way that bad news makes you uncomfortable. In the way that a truth you've been circling for years, one you sense but couldn't quite name, makes you uncomfortable when someone finally says it out loud. The truth is this: everything you were taught about money is backwards. Not slightly off. Not in need of minor adjustment. Fundamentally, structurally, generationally backwards. You were taught that wealth is the reward for effort. That the harder you work, the more you earn. That grinding through discomfort is the price of a good life, and that anyone who tells you otherwise is either naive, privileged, or selling something. That teaching has produced a world full of exhausted, overworked, financially anxious people who are doing everything right, by the rules they were given, and still falling short. Maybe that's you. Maybe it's been you for a long time. This book is for you. Why Wattles, and why now? Wallace D. Wattles wrote The Science of Getting Rich in 1910. He was largely ignored in his lifetime. He died the following year, broke, sick, and unknown outside a small circle of readers who had quietly discovered that his principles worked with an almost unsettling consistency. More than a century later, his work has influenced more self-made fortunes, more business philosophies, and more consciousness transformations than almost any other text in the personal development canon, including texts written by people far more famous. There is a reason for that. Wattles wasn't writing self-help. He was writing something closer to physics. A precise, unflinching description of how human consciousness interacts with the creative intelligence underlying reality, and what specific inner conditions are required to direct that intelligence toward the manifestation of wealth. He didn't dress it up. He didn't soften it for mass consumption. He wrote it the way a man writes when he knows he doesn't have much time and wants to make absolutely sure the reader gets it. This book is a reconstruction of that work, rebuilt for the way modern minds think, the way modern lives are lived, and the specific frequency problems that 21st century culture has introduced into the human relationship with money and supply. It is not a summary. It is not a commentary. It is Wattles' core principles, rebuilt from the ground up, written in language that lands and stays landed. What this book is not. It is not a business strategy. There are no marketing frameworks here, no sales funnels, no productivity systems, no 7-step plans for passive income. It is not a religion. It asks nothing of your existing beliefs. It requires no faith tradition, no spiritual practice, no previous exposure to metaphysics or personal development. It is not toxic positivity. It will not tell you to smile through difficulty, pretend problems don't exist, or affirm your way around legitimate challenges with enough enthusiasm to make them disappear. It is not comfortable. Genuinely useful books rarely are. This one will ask you to look at patterns in your thinking and behavior that most people spend their entire lives successfully avoiding. What this book is. It is a complete reconstruction of your relationship with money, from the foundation up. It starts with the lie. The one you were handed before you were old enough to question it, the one that has been quietly governing your financial reality ever since. It moves through the invisible mechanics of how wealth actually works, the field, the frequency, the mental architecture required to access it. It confronts the specific internal enemies, the competitive mind, the scarcity loop, the receiving wound, that keep intelligent, capable people locked out of the abundance that is, by law, available to them. It gives you the practices, not as rituals to perform, but as precision tools for shifting the one variable that determines everything, the quality of consciousness you bring to your daily existence. And it ends somewhere most wealth books never go, at the level of identity. At the moment you stop being someone who pursues abundance and become someone through whom it naturally flows. 10 chapters. One continuous journey. No standalone advice columns, no disconnected tips. Each chapter builds on the last, the way a real transformation builds, progressively, with each realization making the next one possible. One thing before you begin. Wattles asked his readers for one commitment before they turned the first page of his original work. He asked them to read with an open mind, not a credulous one, not the kind that accepts anything without examination, but a genuinely open one, the kind that is willing to temporarily suspend the framework it already has, long enough to try on a different one. He asked this because he knew that the greatest obstacle to these principles wasn't lack of intelligence or effort or even belief. It was the certainty that the reader already knew how reality worked. That certainty is the one thing that can make this entire book invisible to you, not because the principles don't apply, but because a closed mind processes new information as confirmation of what it already believes and dismisses the rest without examination. Come to this with the posture of a scientist, not a skeptic. A scientist tests. A skeptic dismisses. One is open to being wrong. The other is committed to being right. These principles have been tested by enough people, across enough circumstances, over enough decades, to have earned the right to be tested by you. Give them that. Give yourself that. The only promise this book makes. Not that your life will change effortlessly. Not that wealth will arrive on a schedule. Not that the work will be easy or the transformation immediate. The only promise is this. If you read with honesty, do the challenges at the end of each chapter with genuine commitment, and apply what you understand rather than waiting until you understand everything, something will shift. Not because this book is magic. Because the law is real. It has always been real, and you are about to understand it, perhaps for the first time, clearly enough to use it. That is all it takes. Understanding, clearly enough to use. Everything else follows. Turn the page. The work begins now. Chapter 1. The Lie They Sold You. Let me ask you something. Think about the hardest working person you know. The one who's up before sunrise, answers emails at midnight, never takes a day off, wears their exhaustion like a badge of honor. Are they the wealthiest person you know? Probably not. Now think of someone who seems to move through life with an almost offensive ease. Things seem to fall into their lap. Opportunities arrive uninvited. Money flows toward them with a kind of quiet inevitability. What's the difference? That question used to have no acceptable answer. So instead of answering it honestly, the world gave you a story. A clean, comfortable, socially approved lie. And you believed it, because everyone around you believed it too. The creed nobody questions. Work hard. Hustle. Grind. Sleep when you're dead. This isn't just advice. It's a religion. And like all religions, it comes with its own saints, its own martyrs, and its own version of hell for those who don't comply. The saints are the billionaires who boast about 100-hour weeks. The martyrs are the people who work themselves into the grave and left nothing behind. And hell. Hell is poverty, reserved, the creed insists, for the lazy, the weak, the undisciplined. You were handed this belief before you were old enough to question it. Your parents believed it. Their parents clawed through factory shifts and field labor believing it. Generations passed it down like heirloom furniture, old, unexamined, and quietly rotting at the joints. Here's the brutal truth nobody said out loud. The creed was never meant to make you rich. It was meant to make you useful. The paradox that breaks the myth. Look at the numbers. Not the inspirational posters. The actual numbers. The hardest physical labor on earth, mining, construction, farming, caregiving, pays the least. The people breaking their bodies daily are, statistically, the most financially vulnerable. Meanwhile, the people who sit in quiet rooms thinking, deciding, imagining, they generate most of the world's wealth. If effort were the engine of prosperity, that equation would be reversed. It isn't. It never has been. A century ago, a quiet, sick, largely ignored writer named Wallace D. Wattles noticed the same paradox. He watched industrialized society churning with exhausted workers, men burning 16 hours a day, while a small number of individuals accumulated fortunes that defied any labor-based logic. He concluded what no one in polite company would say: "It is not by hard work that men get rich." Full stop. He didn't walk it back. He didn't soften it for the working-class sensibility of his era. He just said it, clearly, in print, and let the scandal land. What nobody told you about effort. Here's what Wattles understood, and what most self-help books still refuse to say cleanly. Effort without alignment is friction. It generates heat, not results. Think about a time you forced something, really forced it, pushed through resistance, white-knuckled every decision, chased every lead out of desperation. How did that usually end? Now think about the opposite. A time when something just worked. When an idea arrived fully formed, when the right person appeared at the right moment, when money came from a direction you never anticipated. There was a different quality to that experience, a kind of ease underneath the activity. You probably chalked it up to luck, or timing, or coincidence. Wattles called it something else: alignment. The difference wasn't in how much you did. It was in the state you were in while doing it, the internal frequency you were broadcasting, the invisible posture of your consciousness. When you work from fear, from "I need this, I must get this, I'll lose everything if this fails," you transmit a signal of scarcity. And the universe, indifferent and precise as gravity, mirrors that signal back at you in the form of more scarcity to justify the fear. When you work from faith, from a quiet, settled knowing that supply is real and moving toward you, the signal changes. And so does everything else. The real cost of believing the lie. This isn't just philosophy. There is a practical toll to the hustle mythology that nobody accounts for. When you believe money comes from effort, you trade time for income, and time is the one thing you cannot manufacture more of. You become, in the most literal sense, a laborer, renting yourself by the hour, the week, the year. The ceiling is built into the model. When you believe struggle is noble, you start to distrust ease. Good things that arrive without pain feel suspicious. You sabotage them. You wait for the catch. You keep grinding past the point of return because stopping feels like failure, even when the data says otherwise. And worst of all, when you believe your worth is in your output, you stop being a person and start being a machine. Machines don't summon wealth. They just run until they break. Wattles saw the machine age devouring human consciousness, and he wrote against it with every page of his life's work. His central message was this: you do not get rich by doing certain things. You get rich by doing things in a certain way. That certain way is not a productivity system. It's not a morning routine. It's not a 5-step funnel. It is a complete reorientation of how your mind relates to money, creation, and reality itself. What you're actually here to learn. This book is not going to teach you to work harder. There is already a billion-dollar industry dedicated to that. You don't need more of it. This book is going to teach you something older, something quieter, something so counterintuitive that your first instinct will be to dismiss it, the same way people dismissed Wattles when he first wrote it in 1910. That wealth is not earned. It is summoned. That the universe is not a vending machine that rewards input with output. It is a living, responsive, intelligent field, and it answers to the dominant frequency of your thought, not the volume of your effort. That the moment you stop fighting for money and start aligning with it, something shifts. Doors that were bolted shut start to open on their own. You've spent enough time working against the current. It's time to learn how to work with it. In the next chapter, we go beneath the surface, into the invisible architecture of reality that makes all of this not just possible, but inevitable. Because once you understand what the world is actually made of, the idea that you've been struggling for something that was always available to you will be the only thing that truly shocks you. The question isn't whether this is real. The question is, How long have you been working against a law you didn't know existed? Chapter 2. The Invisible Architecture of Reality. You're standing in a room right now. Walls, floor, ceiling. Solid. Obvious. Real. But here's what physics has known for over a century and what almost nobody has integrated into the way they actually live. That room is mostly empty space. The chair you're sitting on, the one that feels so undeniably solid, is 99.9999% vacuum. The atoms making up its structure are so spaced apart that if you scaled a single atom to the size of a football stadium, the nucleus would be a marble at the center. Everything else? Air. The solid world is, at its foundation, almost nothing. And yet, it responds. It obeys. It organizes. Something holds all of that invisible space together into coherent form. Something shapes the vacuum into chairs and bones and bank accounts. Wattles had a name for it, long before particle physics, long before quantum field theory, long before anyone in a lab coat was willing to say it out loud. He called it the thinking substance. The ocean you're swimming in. Wattles opened his masterwork with a statement that most people read and immediately dismiss, which is exactly why most people stay broke. There is a thinking stuff from which all things are made, and which, in its original state, permeates, penetrates, and fills the interspaces of the universe. Read that again. Slowly. Not a metaphor. Not a spiritual platitude to make you feel better on a Tuesday morning. A literal claim about the nature of reality. There is an intelligent, responsive substance woven through the fabric of everything. It fills the spaces between atoms. It underlies every form that has ever existed, every mountain, every empire, every fortune. And here's the part that changes everything. It responds to thought. Not to sweat. Not to resumes. Not to LinkedIn connections or cold outreach or 4 a.m. alarm clocks. To thought. Specifically, to thought held with emotional clarity, sustained with faith, and directed with precision. This substance, Wattles argued, is not passive. It is not inert matter waiting to be pushed around by physical force. It is alive. It has a nature. And that nature is to take the shape of whatever conscious image is impressed upon it, the way water takes the shape of whatever container it enters. You are the container. Your dominant mental image is the shape it's filling. Why this sounds insane, and why that's the point. The rational mind wants to reject this immediately, and that's understandable. We live in a culture that has made a religion out of the measurable. If you can't weigh it, scan it, or put it in a spreadsheet, it doesn't count. But notice what that framework has produced. An epidemic of overworked, underpaid, spiritually hollow people who have optimized their productivity down to 15-minute blocks and still feel like they're falling behind. The materialist worldview, the one that says reality is only what you can touch, has delivered exactly what it promised. A world where you have to fight for every scrap because matter is limited, competition is total, and the only leverage you have is more effort. Wattles looked at that worldview and said, "You've got the causality backwards. Matter is not the cause. It is the result. Thought is the cause. The visible world is the downstream effect of invisible mental activity. Always has been. The only question is whether that mental activity is conscious and directed, or unconscious and scattered. Most people are scattering, firing off contradictory thoughts all day, wanting abundance while fearing lack, desiring freedom while dreading failure, and then wondering why reality feels chaotic and uncooperative. The thinking substance doesn't pick a side. It builds whatever pattern you broadcast most consistently. The signal you're broadcasting right now. Here is where this gets uncomfortably practical. Every thought you think is not just a chemical event in your brain. According to Wattles, and, more recently, according to a growing body of research in consciousness and field theory, thought is a real force with real effects on the living intelligence that underlies matter. Which means you are, at this exact moment, impressing a pattern onto the thinking substance. The question is, what pattern? Most people, if they're honest, broadcast something like this all day. There's never enough. I'm behind. This is harder than it should be. I don't know if this will work. I'm tired. Why does it come so easily to them and not to me? That is a signal, and the substance is receiving it. Every thought of scarcity is a blueprint for more scarcity. Every flash of envy is a declaration that supply is limited. Every moment of exhausted resignation is a command to the field. Give me more of this. It's not punishment. It's not karma. It's mechanics. The universe doesn't judge you. It just builds what you give it to work with. The new operating system. So what does the alternative look like? Not toxic positivity. Not pretending your bank account says something it doesn't. Not forcing a smile while the anxiety eats you alive underneath. The alternative Wattles describes is something more precise and more demanding than that. A deliberate, sustained mental posture of abundance, held not because circumstances justify it, but because the law demands it. This is the new operating system, and installing it requires you to understand three things. First, the substance is infinite. It cannot be depleted. There is no ceiling on what can be created from it. Every fortune built by anyone on this planet was drawn from the same unlimited field available to you right now. Their wealth did not reduce your supply. It proved the supply is real. Second, it mirrors, it doesn't judge. The thinking substance has no opinion about whether you deserve wealth. It has no preference for the educated over the uneducated, the connected over the isolated, the young over the old. It simply responds to the dominant image you hold. Consistently. Precisely. Without exception. Third, your awareness of it is the activation key. Most people move through their entire lives fishing in this infinite ocean and catching nothing because they don't know the ocean is there. The moment you know it's there and understand how it responds, everything changes. You stop being a victim of circumstance and start being a deliberate architect of it. What this chapter is really asking you to do. It's asking you to consider, seriously, not as a concept but as an operational reality, that the world is not what you were taught it is. It's asking you to entertain the possibility that the invisible is more real than the visible, that the cause is always mental before it is material, that the reason your outer life looks the way it does is because your inner life has been broadcasting that pattern for years, faithfully, consistently, without your conscious knowledge. That's not a comfortable idea. It means you can't fully blame the economy, your upbringing, your competitors, or your circumstances. It means responsibility shifts inward in a way that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. But it also means something extraordinary. If the outer world is shaped by the inner world, then changing the inner world changes everything. Not eventually. Not after years of effort and sacrifice. At the level of cause, which precedes the level of effect. Wattles wrote that once a man truly understands the thinking substance, he can never again be truly poor. Not because hardship disappears overnight, but because he knows where wealth actually comes from. And that knowledge cannot be taken from him. The problem you're about to face. You understand the architecture now. The field is real. It's responsive. It mirrors your dominant frequency. So why isn't it working for you yet? Because understanding the field is not the same as being able to access it. Between you and the thinking substance stands a wall, a vibration problem built from years of scarcity conditioning, fear-based thinking, and the unconscious belief that struggle is the price of survival. That wall has a name, and it's more insidious than you think. In Chapter 3, we go inside the frequency problem, the precise mechanism by which the grind mindset jams your own signal, and exactly what it costs you every single day you keep believing that effort is the answer. Here's your honest challenge before the next chapter. Sit with this question for 24 hours, not as philosophy, but as a real audit. What signal am I actually broadcasting? Not what I want to broadcast. What I actually am, consistently, underneath the surface. The answer might be the most important thing you've ever noticed about yourself. Chapter 3. The Frequency Problem. You now know the field exists. You know it's responsive. You know it mirrors what you broadcast. You know the invisible precedes the visible. So here's the question that should be gnawing at you right now. If this field is infinite and always available, why are most people locked out of it? It's not ignorance. Plenty of people have read the books, attended the seminars, watched the videos, bought the courses. They understood the concept. They nodded along. They felt something shift for about a week. And then life went back to exactly what it was before. The reason isn't lack of knowledge. It's a frequency problem, a signal problem, and it's running so deep inside you that you've stopped noticing it, the way you stop hearing a refrigerator hum the moment you move into a new apartment. The hum is still there. It's still shaping everything. You've just normalized it. What frequency actually means. Strip away the spiritual language for a moment. Forget vibration, energy, resonance, all the words that make the analytical mind reach for the exit. Let's talk about what's actually happening. Your dominant emotional state, the one you return to automatically when nothing specific is demanding your attention, is broadcasting a consistent signal to your nervous system, your decision-making, your perception, and yes, to the intelligent field underlying reality. That signal determines what you notice, what you attract, what you repel, what opportunities register as real versus fantasy, and what actions you take or don't take. A person operating on a frequency of abundance doesn't just think differently. They see differently. The same business landscape that looks like a minefield to someone broadcasting scarcity looks like an open field of opportunity to someone broadcasting expansion. Same reality, different signal, completely different experience. This is not metaphor. It is the most practical thing in this entire book. How the grind mindset jams your signal. Here is where the lie from Chapter 1 becomes genuinely dangerous. When you believe that money comes from struggle, that suffering is the price of survival, that ease is suspicious, that rest is laziness, you don't just work too hard. You wire your nervous system to stay in a permanent state of low-grade emergency. Cortisol up, shoulders tight, mind racing at 2 a.m., a constant background hum of not enough, not yet, not safe. That state has a frequency, and that frequency is the exact opposite of what the thinking substance responds to. Wattles was unambiguous about this. He wrote that the person who labors under the belief that wealth requires struggle is thinking against the creative current, not beside it, not slightly off, against it, like a swimmer fighting a riptide, burning enormous energy, making no real progress, exhausted before the day is half done. The grind mindset does three things to your signal simultaneously. It signals scarcity. Every moment you work from "I need this or I'll lose everything" is a broadcast that says supply is limited and I'm running out. The field hears that. It builds more of it. It signals distrust. The hustle culture is, at its core, a refusal to trust. A refusal to believe that anything comes without suffering for it. And trust, deep, operational trust in the intelligence underlying reality, is the exact medium through which the field delivers. Distrust is static on the line. It signals unworthiness. This one hides deeper than the others. Many people who grind obsessively are not just working hard. They are trying to earn the right to receive. Somewhere underneath the productivity is a belief. I have to prove I deserve this before I'm allowed to have it. The field doesn't respond to deserving. It responds to alignment. You cannot hustle your way into worthiness. You either claim it or you don't. These three signals running simultaneously are why intelligent, driven, hard-working people can spend decades in motion and still feel like they're getting nowhere. They're not lazy. They are mistuned. The invisible tax of scarcity thinking. Let's get concrete about what this costs you. Every morning you wake up in anxiety about money. You spend the first hours of your day in a contracted state. In that state, your perception narrows. Literally, neuroscience confirms that stress narrows attentional focus. You stop seeing peripheral opportunities. You make decisions defensively, protecting what you have rather than expanding toward what's possible. Every time you take on work you hate because you're afraid to lose the income, you reinforce the belief that your survival depends on tolerating pain. You teach your nervous system, and the field around you, that abundance comes with suffering attached. Every time you compare yourself to someone doing better and feel that cold sting of inadequacy, you're broadcasting a declaration to the universe: their success is evidence of my lack. And the field, obedient as ever, confirms the lack. The invisible tax of scarcity thinking is compounding. It doesn't just hold you where you are. It actively builds the conditions that justify staying there. Wattles saw this in the workers of his era and identified it as the core mechanism of generational poverty, not the absence of opportunity, but the presence of a mental frequency so locked into lack that opportunity, even when it appeared directly in front of them, was invisible. The shift that changes everything. You cannot force your way out of this. That's the cruel irony. The instinct, when you realize your frequency is misaligned, is to try harder to fix it, to grip the concept tighter, to add another affirmation to the list, another habit to the morning routine, another chapter to read before bed. That's the grind mindset trying to solve the grind problem. It doesn't work. The shift is not an effort. It's a release. Wattles described it as moving from the competitive mind to the creative mind, from the closed fist to the open hand. The frequency of abundance is not achieved. It's allowed. It's what remains when you stop overlaying everything with fear. Here's what that looks like in practice. Stop treating struggle as proof of commitment. Ease is not laziness. When something flows, it doesn't mean you're not working hard enough. It means you're aligned. Learn to recognize the difference between productive effort and fearful compulsion. Interrupt the scarcity loop consciously. The moment you notice the frequency of lack, the tight chest, the racing thoughts, the mental countdown of what you might lose, stop. Recognize it for what it is: static on the line. Not truth. Static. Replace the signal deliberately. Not with fake positivity. With a genuine, grounded statement of what you know to be true about the field. Supply is real. It is infinite. It responds to my alignment, not my anxiety. Say it until your body believes it, not just your mind. Act from expansion, not desperation. Before any significant decision, check the state you're in. Are you moving towards something or running from something? Are you building or escaping? The action can look identical from the outside. The frequency behind it determines the result. The hum you've been ignoring. That refrigerator hum. The one you stopped hearing the moment you moved in. It's been running your life. It's the background frequency of scarcity that was installed before you were old enough to question it, by parents who are scared, by systems designed to keep you productive rather than wealthy, by a culture that profits from your sense of lack. It is not your fault that it's there, but it is your responsibility to change it. Because here's the thing about frequencies: they are not fixed. They are not your identity. They are patterns, and patterns can be interrupted, rewritten, and replaced with something that actually serves you. The rest of this book is the manual for doing exactly that. But first, before we can talk about vision, faith, gratitude, or aligned action, you need to confront the war happening inside your head right now. The one between the part of you that wants to create and the part of you that keeps defaulting to compete. That war has casualties. And in Chapter 4, we are going to count them. Your challenge: for the next 24 hours, track every moment you feel tight, rushed, or anxious about money or results. Don't judge it. Just notice it. Notice how often that state is your default. Notice what decisions it's quietly driving. Because you can't change a frequency you refuse to acknowledge is playing. Chapter 4. The War Inside Your Head. Let's stop being polite about this. You have read 3 chapters about an infinite field of intelligence that responds to your consciousness. You understand the mechanics. You've tracked your frequency. You've nodded along to every idea. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a voice has been running the entire time. It sounds reasonable. It sounds like wisdom. It sounds, in fact, exactly like the voice of someone who has been around long enough to know how the world really works. It says things like, "That's all well and good, but you still need to pay the bills. Other people have advantages you don't. If it were that easy, everyone would be doing it. You need to be realistic." That voice is not your friend. It is not wisdom. It is not realism. It is the competitive mind, and it has been running your life far longer than you realize. 2 minds, 1 body, 1 outcome. Wattles drew a line in the sand that most people spend their lives refusing to cross. On one side, the competitive mind, the one that sees the world as a zero-sum game, that believes every dollar someone else makes is a dollar pulled from your pile, that scans every room for threats, every opportunity for the catch, every success story for evidence that luck or privilege made it possible, because the alternative, that consciousness made it possible, is too destabilizing to accept. On the other side, the creative mind, the one that knows the field is infinite, that another person's wealth is proof of supply, not a drain on it, that instead of asking how do I take what I need, asks what can I build that didn't exist before. These are not personality types. They are not fixed traits handed out at birth. They are states of consciousness, and you switch between them constantly, usually without knowing it. But here's the brutal part. You cannot be in both states simultaneously, and whichever state is dominant is the one shaping your reality. The honest audit. This is the chapter where things get uncomfortable, because this isn't about theory anymore. This is about you, specifically. Answer these questions, not with the version of yourself you'd like to be, with the version that actually shows up on a Tuesday when things aren't going your way. When someone in your industry lands a big client, what's your first reaction? Genuine excitement for them, or a low, cold sting that arrives before you can stop it? When you see someone your age living a life you want, the freedom, the income, the ease, do you feel inspired, or do you feel accused? Like their existence is a verdict on yours? When an opportunity falls through, do you quickly recalibrate, or does part of you feel a grim satisfaction, as if it confirms what you secretly suspected, that this is just how it goes for you? When you imagine someone else reading about the principles in this book and transforming their life, do you root for them, or does a quiet voice whisper, "Yeah, but they probably had a head start"? If any of those landed, if you felt even a flicker of recognition, congratulations. You're human. You've been running the competitive mind. Now stop pretending you weren't. What competition is actually costing you? The competitive mind is not neutral. It is not simply a different philosophical approach to life. It has a direct, measurable, daily cost. Every moment you spend in envy, you are actively reinforcing the belief that supply is scarce. You are telling the thinking substance, with the full emotional authority of your conviction, there is not enough for both of us. And since the field responds to dominant belief, it begins constructing your reality around that premise. More evidence of lack, more competition, more proof that the world is a battlefield. Every moment you spend comparing, measuring your chapter 3 against someone else's chapter 20, you are withdrawing your creative energy from your own work and investing it in a calculation that produces nothing. Comparison is the thief that doesn't just steal your time. It steals your creative frequency. Every moment you spend waiting for others to fail so you can advance, You are operating from a consciousness so contracted, so afraid, so deeply rooted in limitation, that abundance literally cannot reach you. Not because the universe is punishing you, because you have built a wall of scarcity thinking so dense that supply cannot find the door. Wattles called this living in the competitive plane. He said it with the quiet certainty of someone who had watched it destroy lives. He wrote that those who remain in competition can never truly prosper, not because they lack intelligence or work ethic, but because they have chosen a game that, by design, produces losers. And the frequency of expecting to lose is the frequency of losing. The disguises competition wears. Here's why this is harder to catch than it sounds. The competitive mind is a master of disguise. It almost never announces itself as envy or fear. It arrives wearing respectable clothes. It calls itself ambition, when it's actually the terror of being left behind. It calls itself standards, when it's actually the refusal to celebrate others' success because it feels threatening. It calls itself market awareness, when it's actually obsessive comparison dressed up in business language. It calls itself realism, when it's actually the deeply ingrained belief that you don't get to have what they have. It calls itself strategy, when it's actually competition-driven thinking pretending to be creativity. The competitive mind is sophisticated. It has had years to adapt to your defenses. It knows exactly what language to use to sound rational inside your particular head. And every time you let it operate unchallenged, every time you accept its framing without question, it tightens its grip on your frequency. The choice that actually matters. Wattles was not naive. He knew the world contained real competitors, real market forces, real people who would gladly take what you were building and claim it as their own. He wasn't telling you to be passive. He wasn't telling you to ignore reality. He was telling you something far more sophisticated. The creative mind doesn't ignore competition. It simply operates on a level where competition becomes irrelevant. When you create, genuinely create, from the intelligence of the infinite field moving through you, you produce something that didn't exist before, something that carries a frequency, a distinctiveness, a quality of aliveness that cannot be replicated by someone operating from fear and imitation. The competitive mind copies. The creative mind originates. The competitive mind fights for market share. The creative mind expands the market. The competitive mind asks, "How do I beat them?" The creative mind asks, "What does the world need that I'm uniquely positioned to give?" Those two questions lead to entirely different lives. One is a race with no finish line. The other is a calling with no ceiling. How to switch states, for real. Not as an exercise. Not as a one-time shift you make and then forget about by Thursday. As a daily, deliberate practice of choosing which mind governs you. When envy arrives, and it will, use it as a signal, not a verdict. The thing you envy is always pointing at something you want and believe you can't have. That belief is the problem, not them. Reframe the envy as direction. This tells me what I want. Now let me go create it. Stop consuming to compare. The dopamine loop of scrolling through other people's wins while feeling quietly diminished is one of the most efficient ways to keep yourself locked in competitive frequency. Notice when consumption is inspiring you versus shrinking you. One feeds the creative mind. The other feeds the competitive one. Bless what you want to attract. This is Wattles at his most practical and his most radical. Every time you genuinely congratulate someone for their success, not performatively, not through gritted teeth, but with actual warmth, you tell the field, that is possible. That is real. That is available. And in doing so, you raise your own frequency toward it. Create something today. Not plan it. Not research it. Make something. Write a page. Build a prototype. Send the pitch. The creative mind is activated by creative action. The more you create, the more naturally you inhabit the creative state. The muscle grows with use. The war ends when you stop fighting it. The war inside your head, between the part of you that wants to expand and the part trained to compete and contract, doesn't end by defeating the competitive mind. It ends by starving it. Every time you choose creation over competition, you withdraw energy from the competitive frequency. Over time, it loses its grip. The default state shifts. You stop scanning for threats and start scanning for possibilities. The same world that looked like a battlefield starts to look like an open field. That shift is not an event. It's a practice. It happens chapter by chapter, day by day, choice by choice. You've now stripped out the old operating system and identified the bug that was corrupting it. Now it's time to build something new. In Chapter 5, we construct the architecture of vision, the precise mental blueprint that commands the thinking substance into action. Because the creative mind, unleashed from competition and scarcity, needs somewhere to aim. And the clarity of where you aim determines everything that follows. Your challenge, today, find one person whose success you have quietly resented, even slightly, and deliberately, consciously, genuinely wish them more of it. Notice what that costs you emotionally. That cost is the exact size of the wall between you and your own abundance. Chapter 5. The Architecture of Vision. Most people have wishes. A handful have visions. The difference between those two groups is not talent, not timing, not the zip code they were born in. It is the precision and permanence of the mental image they carry. A wish is vapor. It drifts in when conditions feel right and dissolves the moment life gets difficult. It has no edges, no texture, no emotional weight. It's the mental equivalent of saying somewhere warm when someone asks where you want to travel. Technically a preference, practically useless. A vision is architecture. It has walls and floors and load-bearing structures. It exists in your mind with the same solidity as a building exists in the physical world. You can walk through it. You can feel the temperature of it. You know exactly what it looks like at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. Wattles was not interested in your wishes. He was interested in your blueprint. And if you don't have one, a real one, precise and unwavering, then everything in the previous 4 chapters is just interesting reading. Why vagueness is a command for more chaos. The thinking substance does not deal in approximations. It is, by nature, a precise creative intelligence. It takes the dominant image held in a conscious mind and begins organizing matter, circumstance, timing, and people around that image. It is the most powerful creative force in existence. And it needs something specific to work with. Give it a vague longing, I want more money, and it has nothing to build. More money than what? In what form? Through what channel? By when? The signal is all noise and no frequency. The field receives it the way a contractor receives a note that says, build me something nice. Nothing gets built. Give it a definite image, sharp, detailed, emotionally charged, held with faith, and the machinery of creation begins to move. Events reorganize. People appear at the right moment. Ideas arrive that couldn't have been manufactured by logic alone. Not because the universe is magical. Because you've given the creative intelligence of the field a precise instruction to execute. Wattles wrote that most people move through life like ships without charts, tossed by conditions instead of commanding them. They wake up and react to whatever the day brings. They make decisions based on what's immediately visible rather than what they've deliberately constructed in the invisible. And then they wonder why life feels like something that happens to them rather than something they're creating. A definite vision is the chart. Without it, you're just drifting with extra steps. The anatomy of a real vision. Not every mental picture qualifies as a vision in Wattles' sense. Most of what people call visualization is closer to daydreaming with good intentions. A real vision has 5 components. All 5 must be present. Miss one and the signal weakens. Specificity. Not financial freedom. That's a concept, not a picture. A vision is the actual scene. Where are you? What does your day look like in concrete, sensory detail? What are you working on? Who are you with? What does your environment feel like? The more specific the image, the more precisely the field can organize around it. Vagueness is the enemy of creation. Emotional reality. A cold, intellectual picture has no creative force. The thinking substance responds to thought charged with emotion, the feeling of already being in the reality you're constructing. Not wishful emotion, not desperate hope, but the settled, warm satisfaction of someone who already has what they wanted. Wattles called it the feeling of completion. It is the difference between reading a menu and tasting the food. Consistency. A vision held for 10 minutes in the morning and abandoned for the rest of the day is not a dominant mental image. It is a brief interruption to your dominant mental image, which is whatever you return to automatically under pressure. The vision must become your default, the picture your mind gravitates toward when it's not occupied with anything specific. This takes repetition and discipline. Not the grinding kind, the devoted kind. Faith, not force. Here is where most people break down. They hold the vision, but they grip it, white-knuckled, tense, monitoring it constantly for signs of progress. That tension is fear wearing the costume of focus. A real vision is held with relaxed certainty, the way you're certain the sun will rise tomorrow. You don't check the horizon every 20 minutes in anxious vigil. You simply know. Refusal of contradiction. Every time doubt floods in, and it will, daily, loudly, with very convincing evidence, you return to the image. Not with aggression. With the quiet authority of someone who has already decided. Wattles was direct about this. Doubt is the only force capable of erasing what faith has constructed. A single sustained period of doubt can dismantle weeks of precise vision building. This is why returning to the image, again and again, is not obsessive. It is essential maintenance. The exercise nobody does properly. Wattles prescribed a daily practice of what he called entering the mental image. Modern readers tend to skim past this and keep going. That is a mistake. This is the practice. Find silence. Not the passive silence of distraction finally running out. Active silence. Deliberately withdrawn from noise, screens, conversation, and the low-level anxiety of the to-do list. Even 10 minutes. The point is that in silence, imagination becomes clean, uncontaminated. Enter the image. Not from outside it, observing it like a painting on a wall. From inside it. First person. Present tense. You are there. The environment around you is specific and sensory. You're not thinking about the life you want. You are, for these minutes, in it. Charge it with gratitude. Not gratitude for what you currently have, though that matters too, but gratitude for what you're experiencing right now in the vision. The deep, settled thankfulness of someone who arrived. This emotion is not manufactured. It emerges naturally when the image is vivid enough. And when it does, it fires the vision into the thinking substance with a force that no amount of intellectual affirmation can match. Release it. Walk out of the silence without clutching the vision, checking on it, or anxiously looking for signs that it's working. Release it the way a gardener releases a seed into the ground, with trust that the invisible process is already underway. The moment you need to see immediate evidence is the moment you've shifted from faith back to fear. Do this daily. Not occasionally. Not when you feel inspired. Daily. Because the consistent, unbroken repetition of the image is what elevates it from a passing thought to a dominant frequency, and dominant frequency is what commands the field. What stands between you and your vision? The architecture is clear. The practice is defined. So why don't most people do it? 3 reasons. All of them uncomfortable to say out loud. Fear of commitment. A definite vision means choosing. And choosing means everything you don't choose is left behind. The person who keeps their vision vague never has to grieve the roads not taken. Precision requires courage. The courage to say this is what I'm building and mean it. Fear of disappointment. If you never commit to a specific picture, you can never be specifically wrong. Vagueness is a defense mechanism. It keeps hope alive without risking the devastation of a clearly defined failure. But Wattles had no patience for this logic. He argued that the only real failure is the failure to commit, because a committed vision, held with faith, cannot ultimately fail. It is law. The unconscious belief that you don't deserve a specific, extraordinary life. This is the deepest one. Many people, when they actually sit down to construct a definite vision of what they want, feel a sudden, wordless sense of wrongness. Like they're overreaching. Like specificity itself is arrogance. Like the universe will punish them for wanting something so particular and so good. That feeling is the competitive mind's final argument. It is the scarcity belief in its most intimate form, the one that lives not in your bank account but in your sense of what you're allowed to want. Ignore it. Build the vision anyway. The blueprint is the power. Here is the truth Wattles understood that took everyone else another century to begin verifying. The mental image is not preparation for creation. It is creation. The moment a specific, emotionally charged, faith-held vision exists in your mind, the creative process has already begun. The physical manifestation is downstream. It always arrives later, because matter is slower than thought. But the cause is already in motion the instant the blueprint is complete and the faith is real. You are not waiting for the universe to act. The universe began acting the moment you decided with clarity. Every builder, inventor, and architect of civilizations throughout history understood this intuitively. They didn't wait to see the bridge before they believed in the bridge. They saw the bridge so completely in their minds that the physical version was almost anticlimactic, a confirmation of what was already, in the only dimension that matters, already real. That's not mysticism. That's how creation works at every level of existence. Your vision is your command. The question is whether you're willing to make it definite enough to be obeyed. What comes next? The architecture is built. The blueprint is drawn. The creative mind is engaged and aimed. But there is a gap, and it is not small. Between the clear vision and the physical reality stands a force that most people either misunderstand or entirely mistake for its counterfeit. That force is faith. Not the performative kind. Not the Sunday morning feels-good kind. Not the kind that evaporates the first time circumstances push back. The operational kind. The kind that Wattles called the substance of things desired, the actual energetic density that transforms imagination into form. Without it, the clearest vision in the world is just a beautiful picture with no weight behind it. In Chapter 6, we dismantle everything you think you know about belief and replace it with something that actually works. Your challenge, before the next chapter, spend 15 minutes in genuine silence constructing your definite vision. Not brainstorming it. Not writing a list. Actually entering it. First person, present tense, sensory and specific. Notice where resistance shows up. Notice where the image goes blurry. That blur is the exact location of your next breakthrough. Chapter 6. Faith is not what you think it is. You've been lied to about faith too. Not maliciously. Just, consistently, culturally, thoroughly enough that the word itself has been hollowed out, replaced with something softer, safer, and almost completely useless. The version of faith most people carry looks like this: a sincere, slightly desperate hope that things will work out, sustained by positive thinking and the occasional prayer, contingent on circumstances not getting too bad, and quietly abandoned the moment visible evidence suggests it isn't working. That is not faith. That is hope with a religious paint job. And Wattles would tell you, plainly, that it won't move a single atom of the thinking substance in your direction. Real faith, operational faith, the kind that actually functions as a creative force, is something most people have never experienced. Not because they're spiritually deficient, because nobody ever told them the difference. Until now. Hope waits. Faith knows. This is the line that cuts through everything. Hope is future tense. It says, someday, if conditions align, if I'm lucky enough, if I do everything right, maybe it will happen. Hope is lovely. Hope keeps people alive in dark seasons. But hope, as a creative force, is essentially inert. It is waiting dressed up as belief. Faith is present tense. It says, it is already forming. The invisible process is already underway. The physical confirmation is simply lagging behind the cause, because matter is always slower than thought. Faith doesn't wait for evidence. It operates as the cause from which evidence eventually emerges. Wattles put it this way: the person of faith does not pray for wealth and then wait nervously to see if it arrives. They know, with the same quiet certainty they know the sun is behind the clouds on an overcast day, that supply is real, it is responding, and it is moving toward them right now through channels they may not yet be able to see. That knowing is not arrogance. It is not delusion. It is alignment with how creation actually works. The seed doesn't hope it becomes a tree. The Lord doesn't require the seed's emotional participation. But the human who plants it in alignment, tending it with the right conditions, trusting the process, not digging it up every 3 days to check progress, is operating in faith. And the tree comes. The two signals running simultaneously. Here is the specific mechanism by which most people destroy their own creative process, and they do it constantly, without knowing it. They hold the vision from chapter 5, genuinely, specifically, with real emotional charge. And then, 20 minutes later, they look at their bank account. And the bank account speaks louder. In that moment, two simultaneous signals are broadcasting into the thinking substance. One says, I am wealthy, supply flows to me, my vision is real. The other says, look at these numbers, look at this evidence, this isn't working, I'm behind, I'm losing. The universe doesn't adjudicate between them. It doesn't weigh which one you meant more sincerely. It responds to the dominant signal, the one carrying the most emotional weight, the most repetition, the most certainty. And for most people, the bank account wins. Every time. Because it's visible, immediate, and backed by years of conditioning that says visible things are more real than invisible ones. Wattles called this thinking faithlessly, and he was precise about its consequences. To think faithlessly is to sever your connection to the source at the exact moment the invisible process was gaining momentum. It is the equivalent of planting a seed, watering it daily, and then digging it up every week to see if it's grown yet. You're not checking on the process. You're destroying it. What faith actually feels like. Because it has been so thoroughly misdefined, it's worth describing faith as a lived experience rather than a concept. Real faith does not feel like effort. It does not feel like gritted teeth and forced positivity. It does not feel like repeating affirmations so loudly in your head that you're trying to drown out the doubt underneath. Real faith feels like stillness, like the particular quality of calm that comes not from having no problems but from knowing, at a level below thought, that the problems are not the final word. It has a quality of settledness to it, a groundedness that isn't shaken by surface turbulence. Think back, because Wattles invited this, and so do I, to a moment in your life when you simply knew something was coming before it arrived. Not hoped, not prayed, knew. You spoke about it as if it had already happened. You felt the satisfaction of it before the evidence appeared. And then, it happened. That was faith. Not a special spiritual state reserved for mystics. A natural human capacity you accessed without even realizing what it was. The goal is not to manufacture that feeling artificially. It is to understand it clearly enough that you can return to it deliberately, especially when circumstances are pushing hard against your vision. The anatomy of operational faith. Wattles gave a framework. It is not complicated. It is just demanding. Speak in completion, not petition. The language of faith is present tense. Not I will have, but I have. I am. It flows. This is not lying to yourself. It is speaking from the level of cause rather than the level of visible effect. Words carry frequency. Present tense certainty carries a fundamentally different signal than future tense hope. Change the language and you change the broadcast. Feel before you see. Every day, not as a ritual but as a genuine act of consciousness, enter the emotional reality of the fulfilled vision. Not the image, the feeling underneath the image. The specific texture of satisfaction, freedom, ease, or abundance that you're moving toward. Emotion is the magnetic field. The more consistently you inhabit the feeling, the more powerfully the field organizes itself around that frequency. Detach from the how and the when. This is where most people's faith collapses. They believe, until the path doesn't look the way they expected. Then they interpret the unexpected route as evidence that it isn't working. Wattles was ruthless about this. The thinking substance does not need your approval of its methods. It needs your commitment to the outcome. Release the timeline. Release the specific delivery channel. Stay faithful to the destination, flexible about the road. Act as the channel, not the beggar. Faith without action is incomplete, but the quality of the action matters as much as the action itself. A person operating in faith works, plans, decides, and creates from the posture of someone who already has what they're building toward. Their actions carry a different weight, a different energy, a different frequency than the actions of someone scrambling in desperation. The beggar does the same tasks. The outcomes differ because the signal differs. Maintain faith through the delay. This is the hardest part. Between the clear vision and the physical manifestation there is always a gap, and that gap is where most people quit. The visible world hasn't caught up yet. The bank account still says the old story. The circumstances still look like the old chapter. In that gap, doubt feels rational. Giving up feels reasonable. Faith feels almost absurd. And yet, that gap is not failure. It is gestation. The invisible work is happening. The substance is organizing. The delay is not a denial. It is the time between planting and harvest, and it is not optional. Every great creation in human history was born in that gap, sustained by faith when nothing visible justified it. The wall doubt builds. Let's be specific about what doubt actually does, because it is not simply the absence of faith. It is an active force working in the opposite direction. Every sustained period of doubt does not merely pause your creative progress. It actively dismantles it. It sends a countersignal to the field. This is not real, this will not work, I was fooling myself, and the field, obedient as always, begins reorganizing around that signal instead. Think of the creative process as constructing a building in the invisible. Faith is the labor. Every day of aligned thought and feeling adds another floor to the structure. And then doubt arrives and takes a wrecking ball to it. You don't lose all progress immediately, but you lose more than you think. And then you have to rebuild. And if doubt comes again before the building is complete, you lose more. And eventually you conclude that it simply doesn't work, when what actually happened is that you kept destroying your own construction before it could break through into physical form. Wattles wrote that a single act of doubt does more damage to the creative process than many days of contrary circumstances. Circumstances are external. Doubt is internal. And the field responds to internal signals with far more fidelity than to external events. Guard your faith the way you guard anything precious and irreplaceable. Because that is exactly what it is. The bridge is built from this side. Here is the final, clarifying truth about faith that Wattles wanted every reader to carry forward. The bridge between your vision and its physical manifestation is not built from the other side. It is built from yours. Every day of genuine faith adds a plank. Every act of gratitude reinforces the structure. Every aligned action moves the bridge closer to the shore on the other side. You cannot see the other shore yet. That's not the point. The point is that you keep building, with the certainty of an engineer who knows the math, who has read the law, who understands that if the conditions are right, the structure must hold. The other shore always appears. It appears to everyone who builds long enough without destroying what they've built. The only question is how long you're willing to build in the dark. In Chapter 7, we introduce the force that keeps faith alive when the dark gets thick. The emotion that Wattles called the magnetic key, the one that locks your frequency to the field of abundance even when nothing around you justifies it. It is not discipline. It is not willpower. It is not positive thinking. It is gratitude, and it works in ways that will surprise you. Your challenge: identify one area of your life where you've been hoping instead of knowing, where you want something but secretly expect disappointment. Sit with it, and then, just once today, speak about it in present tense, as if it's already true. Notice how your body responds to that shift. The resistance you feel is the exact gap between your current frequency and the one that creates. Chapter 7: The Gratitude Frequency. There is an emotion so underestimated, so consistently misclassified as soft and secondary, that most serious people skip past it entirely on their way to the real work. They build the vision. They develop the faith. They audit their frequency and dismantle the competitive mind. They act with deliberate intention. And then they wonder why something still feels slightly off, like an engine running clean but missing a spark. That missing spark is gratitude. Not the thank you note version. Not the gratitude journal you filled out for 11 days in January and quietly abandoned. Not the performance of appreciation you offer when things go well. The operational kind. The kind Wattles called the magnetic key, the emotion that doesn't just accompany abundance but actively generates it. The kind that works especially when things are not going well. You have the causality backwards. Almost everyone treats gratitude as a response to good fortune. Something good happens. You feel grateful. The feeling is real, warm, genuine, and entirely reactive. It shows up after the fact, as a byproduct of circumstances cooperating with your desires. That version of gratitude is pleasant. It is not powerful. Wattles reversed the causality completely. He taught that gratitude is not the effect of abundance. It is the cause of it. It is not what you feel when supply arrives. It is what you broadcast to ensure supply keeps moving toward you. This is not wordplay. It is a precise metaphysical claim about how the thinking substance responds to the human consciousness that is in relationship with it. When you are grateful, genuinely, deeply, not as performance but as a lived orientation toward reality, you are broadcasting a signal that says, there is good in what already is. There is supply in what already exists. The source is real and it is working. And the field, which mirrors dominant belief with perfect fidelity, responds by sending more of what your gratitude is acknowledging. When you are ungrateful, when you complain, resent, dismiss what you have while obsessing over what you lack, you broadcast the opposite signal. What I have is not enough. The source is withholding. Lack is real and present. And again, the field obeys. More lack. More withholding. More evidence to justify the resentment. It is not punishment. It is reflection. You cannot simultaneously broadcast lack and receive abundance. The frequencies are incompatible. The science Wattles didn't have but intuited anyway. Wattles wrote in 1910. He didn't have neuroscience, positive psychology, or field research to cite. He had observation, logic, and an unusually clear view of how human consciousness interacted with the conditions of a person's life. What he intuited, research has since begun to confirm in its own language. A mind operating in chronic complaint and dissatisfaction activates the same stress pathways that govern fear and threat response. Cortisol rises. Perception narrows. The cognitive bandwidth available for creative thinking, for seeing opportunity, for generating novel solutions, for recognizing meaningful coincidence, contracts dramatically. A mind operating in genuine gratitude activates a fundamentally different neurological state. broader perception, greater cognitive flexibility, heightened pattern recognition. The very mental conditions most associated with what people call being in the zone, the state where ideas arrive fully formed, where connections appear effortlessly, where the right person shows up at the right moment. Wattles called this being in resonance with the source. Modern researchers call it optimal cognitive function. The mechanism is different in each description. The result is identical. Gratitude doesn't just feel better. It makes you functionally more capable of receiving and recognizing the abundance that is always, in every moment, available to you. The complaint tax. Let's talk about what it actually costs to live in a state of chronic dissatisfaction, because it is not a small price. Every complaint you voice, not the honest acknowledgement of difficulty, but the habitual, low-grade broadcasting of what's wrong, what's unfair, what isn't working, is a withdrawal from your creative account. It costs you frequency. It costs you the clarity of signal that the thinking substance needs to organize your supply toward you. Wattles wrote something that stopped readers cold in his era and should stop you cold now. The man who can work day and night, yet live in complaint, cuts himself off from the source of his supply. Read that again. It doesn't matter how hard you work. It doesn't matter how skilled, how connected, how strategically brilliant you are. If the dominant emotional broadcast running underneath all of that activity is dissatisfaction, this isn't enough, this isn't fast enough, this isn't fair, you are jamming your own signal. The complaint tax is real, and it compounds daily. Gratitude under pressure, the advanced practice. Anyone can be grateful when things are going well. That requires no skill, no discipline, no real understanding of how gratitude actually works as a force. The test, and the practice that actually moves mountains, is gratitude when the circumstances don't justify it. When the deal falls through. When the numbers don't cooperate. When the person you counted on disappears. When 6 months of aligned effort hasn't yet produced the visible breakthrough you expected. That is when most people abandon gratitude entirely. And that is precisely when it matters most. Here's why. In the gap between vision and manifestation, the uncomfortable lag between cause and visible effect that we discussed in the last chapter, your frequency is under the most pressure. Circumstances are actively broadcasting the old story. The bank account, the calendar, the conversations around you are all speaking the language of the past. Gratitude, practiced deliberately in that gap, is the act of choosing the new story over the visible evidence of the old one. It is the emotional declaration that the source is real, the process is working, and the delay is not a denial. It keeps faith alive. It maintains the frequency of completion when completion is not yet visible. It is, in Wattles' exact words, the force that keeps you in touch with the source. And the moment you disconnect from the source, through sustained resentment, complaint, or anxious ingratitude, the creative process loses its fuel. Not permanently, but the delay extends. The gap widens. And what could have arrived in weeks arrives, if at all, in years. The practice of radical gratitude. This is not a feelings exercise. This is a frequency discipline. Morning calibration. Before your mind is fully colonized by the agenda of the day, spend 5 deliberate minutes in genuine gratitude. Not a list of things you're thankful for. That's a habit, not a practice. A genuine, felt acknowledgement of the supply that already exists in your life. The air in your lungs. The intelligence in your mind. The invisible field that is, right now, organizing itself around your dominant frequency. Feel it as real. Because it is. Gratitude for the unseen. This is Wattles at his most radical. Be grateful not just for what you have, but for what is forming. For the vision that is, in the invisible, already real. For the supply that is already moving toward you through channels you can't yet see. This is not pretending. This is operating from the level of cause. And it fires the most powerful signal into the field you can send. Interrupt the complaint loop. The moment you notice dissatisfaction broadcasting, in your thoughts, your words, your body language, stop. Not with self-criticism. With a deliberate redirect. Ask, what is actually working right now? What is already present that I'm not acknowledging? Not to deny difficulty. To refuse to let difficulty become your dominant signal. Bless your competition. We touched on this in Chapter 4, but it belongs here too, because it is one of the most powerful gratitude practices available to you. Every time you encounter someone succeeding in your field, genuinely wish them more. Mean it. Feel it. Not because you're performing magnanimity, but because blessing their abundance tells the universe, in the clearest possible signal, supply is real, it's working, and there is more than enough for me too. Close the day in completion. Before sleep, when the subconscious is most receptive, most permeable to the signals you're sending, spend 3 minutes in the emotional reality of your vision as if it already exists. Grateful for it. Settled in it. Certain of it. The subconscious mind does not distinguish between vividly imagined and physically real. You are programming the deepest layer of your creative apparatus every single night. Make sure you're running the right program. The frequency that never fails. Here is what decades of applying these principles, and a century of people reading Wattles' original work and watching it transform their lives, consistently demonstrates. Gratitude is the one frequency that the thinking substance cannot ignore. It is the highest signal a human consciousness can broadcast. It combines faith, the certainty that supply is real, with love, the warmth of genuine appreciation, with alignment, the harmony between the creator and the created. When those three forces operate simultaneously through the vehicle of authentic gratitude, the field responds with a kind of inevitability that Wattles called effortless. Not easy in the soft sense, effortless in the truest sense, flowing with the current rather than fighting it. You have now built the complete internal architecture, the old lie dismantled, the field understood, the frequency identified, the competitive mind neutralized, the vision constructed, the faith operational, the gratitude activated. The inner world is set. Now it's time to talk about how you move through the outer world from this new foundation. Because aligned internal work with no external expression is just sophisticated daydreaming. In Chapter 8, we get tactical. We talk about how to act, how to work, decide, speak, and move from the state of faith and gratitude you've now built. Not differently in terms of what you do, completely differently in terms of who is doing it. That shift, from fearful actor to faithful channel, is where the outer world finally begins to catch up with the inner one. Your challenge, for the next 24 hours, impose a complaint fast. Every time dissatisfaction surfaces, in thought, word, or body language, stop it at the source. Replace it with a single, genuine acknowledgement of what is already working. Not positive spin. Honest recognition. Track how often the complaint impulse arises. That frequency is your current gratitude debt, and paying it down starts now. Chapter 8. Move like you already know. Everything up to this point has been internal. Dismantling the lie. Understanding the field. Identifying the frequency problem. Clearing out the competitive mind. Building the vision. Installing operational faith. Activating the gratitude frequency. 7 chapters of inner architecture. Precise, necessary, non-negotiable. But here's the trap that catches intelligent people who study these principles. They become extraordinarily good at the inner work and completely passive in the outer world. They meditate on abundance in the morning and then spend the day waiting for it to arrive. They hold the vision with genuine faith and then take no action, reasoning that if the universe is truly handling it, their job is simply to stay aligned. That is not what Wattles taught. That is spiritual procrastination dressed up in metaphysical language. Wattles was precise. Faith without action is incomplete. The thinking substance needs a channel through which to deliver. And that channel is you, moving, deciding, creating, engaging with the physical world in a very specific way. Not harder, differently. The distinction is everything. The certain way, finally defined. Wattles' most famous and most misunderstood phrase is this one. You do not get rich by doing certain things. You get rich by doing things in a certain way. Every chapter in this book has been building toward a complete definition of that certain way. Now we can state it fully. The certain way is not a productivity system. It is not a morning routine, a sales script, or a business strategy, though all of those can be done in the certain way. The certain way is the quality of consciousness you bring to every action you take. It is the difference between doing the same task from two completely different internal states, one contracted, fearful, desperate for a specific outcome, the other expanded, faithful, certain of supply and detached from the specific mechanism of delivery. The task looks identical from the outside. The results diverge over time in ways that defy purely logical explanation. Because one action is broadcasting scarcity into the field while executing. The other is broadcasting abundance. And the field responds to both with its characteristic precision. The three qualities of aligned action. Wattles identified three qualities that distinguish action taken in the certain way from action taken in the ordinary way. These are not motivational concepts. They are operational specifications. Efficiency, not urgency. There is a profound difference between efficient action and urgent action. Urgency is fear in motion, the frantic, scattered energy of someone who believes that if they don't move fast enough, they'll lose everything. It produces activity that looks like productivity but generates enormous amounts of wasted motion and poor decisions. Efficiency is faith in motion, the calm, deliberate movement of someone who knows that every action taken in alignment compounds toward the outcome that is already forming. It wastes nothing. It doesn't repeat itself out of anxiety. It moves once, clearly, with full presence, and trusts the result. Wattles wrote that the person operating in the certain way does not hurry, not because they're lazy, but because they understand that hurry is the signal of someone who doesn't trust the process. Hurry broadcasts doubt. Efficiency broadcasts certainty. Do less with more presence. Every time. Purpose, not desperation. Every action you take is either moving toward something or running from something. Purpose-driven action moves toward the vision. It is an expression of the creative mind building what it has already decided to build. Desperation-driven action runs from fear. It is the competitive mind scrambling to prevent loss. These produce radically different results even when the actions are technically identical. The salesperson who makes calls from genuine belief in their product and genuine desire to serve the person on the other end, and the salesperson who makes the same calls from the terrified need to hit quota, are not in the same profession. They are in the same industry with completely different relationships to the thinking substance. One is a channel. The other is a beggar. The field knows the difference instantly. Expression, not transaction. This is the one most people have never been offered. Wattles taught that the highest form of work is not the exchange of labor for compensation. It is the expression of creative intelligence through purposeful activity. When your work becomes expression, when you are pouring genuine creative energy, genuine care, genuine vision into what you do, it carries a quality that purely transactional work cannot replicate. Other people feel it. Clients feel it. Opportunities feel it. The field feels it. Work done as expression carries the frequency of the creative mind. It magnetizes. It multiplies. It generates results disproportionate to the visible effort behind it, which is exactly what Wattles meant when he talked about effortless wealth. Not the absence of work, the presence of alignment within the work. How aligned action actually looks in practice. Let's make this concrete. Because act from faith sounds clean in theory and murky at 9 a.m. on a Monday when the inbox is full and the revenue is short. Before any significant action, check the state you're in. not as a lengthy ritual. A 10-second internal audit. Am I moving towards something or away from something right now? Am I about to send this email from certainty or from anxiety? Am I making this call from genuine belief or from fear of what happens if I don't? If the answer is fear, stop. Not permanently. Just long enough to reorient. Take 30 seconds. Return to the vision. Return to the gratitude. Reconnect to the frequency of the person you're becoming and the supply that is already forming around you. Then act. That 30-second pause, practiced consistently, is worth more than any productivity system ever invented, because it shifts the signal behind the action. And the signal behind the action is what the field responds to. Do the thing that is immediately in front of you, fully. Wattles was relentlessly practical about this. He didn't teach people to wait for perfect conditions or peak inspiration. He taught them to give every present moment, every present task, every present interaction the full creative energy of an aligned mind. Not because every task is glamorous, because the habit of full presence in small actions is the same habit that governs large ones. The person who brings complete, faith-driven presence to the unglamorous work is the same person whose bigger moves carry the weight of someone who has been practicing alignment for years. You don't get to be a channel for large things while being a sleepwalker through small ones. Speak as the person who already has what they're building. Language is not decoration. It is frequency made audible. The words you use in daily conversation, about your work, your finances, your prospects, your capabilities, are broadcasting a continuous signal into the field. The person who says, "I'm struggling to get clients," and the person who says, "I'm building something that the right clients are already moving toward," are not describing different situations. They are creating different situations. One signal is scarcity. The other is supply. The field responds to both with its characteristic obedience. This is not about lying. It is about choosing which truth to amplify, the truth of current appearances or the truth of the cause already set in motion. Speak from the cause. Always. Give more than expected. Always. Wattles taught this as an absolute principle of the certain way. Every interaction, every deliverable, every exchange, give more value than what was explicitly contracted. Not as a marketing strategy. As a frequency discipline. Every act of genuine generosity broadcasts abundance. It tells the field, "I have more than enough to give." And the field, which mirrors dominant belief, sends more. The person who withholds, who gives exactly what's required and no more, protecting their resources from imagined depletion, is broadcasting scarcity in one of its most concrete forms. The universe does not reward hoarding. It rewards the open hand. The identity behind the action. Here is the deepest layer of this chapter, and it connects directly to what comes next. You can follow every tactical instruction in this chapter, the state check, the full presence, the language shift, the generous giving, and still not be operating in the certain way. Because the certain way is not ultimately a set of behaviors. It is an identity. It is the identity of someone who has genuinely internalized, at the level of felt reality rather than intellectual concept, that they are a channel for infinite supply. That wealth, opportunity, and creativity flow through them rather than to them. That their job is not to chase, earn, or deserve, but to align, open, and allow. From that identity, actions look different. They carry different weight. They generate different results. Not because the actions are cleverly designed, but because the person taking them is operating from a fundamentally different relationship with reality. You cannot fake that identity. You cannot perform it convincingly enough to fool the field. But you can grow into it. Chapter by chapter, practice by practice, action by action, taken from the highest frequency available to you in each moment, until that frequency becomes your natural resting state. That is what Wattles meant by the certain way. Not a technique. A transformation. The question this chapter is asking: Every action you take today is taken from some internal state. That state is either aligned with the creative frequency you've been building, or it isn't. The work of this chapter is not to add more actions to your day. It is to audit the ones already there and ask, with complete honesty, who is taking this action? The fearful self, grinding for scraps and secretly expecting disappointment? Or the aligned self, the channel, the creator, the person who has accepted the law and is moving through the world as its expression? Those two people can have the same to-do list, the same skills, the same starting resources. They will not build the same life. Choose which one shows up tomorrow morning, and the morning after that, and the one after that. Because the compound interest of showing up as the aligned self, daily, imperfectly, persistently, is the mechanism by which every outer transformation in this book eventually becomes real. What's next? You've changed what you believe. You've changed how you feel. You've changed how you act. But there's one final, most fundamental shift left, and it's the one most people miss even after doing everything else right. It's the shift in identity itself. Not what you do, not how you think, who you are. In Chapter 9, we go to the deepest level of this entire journey, the moment you stop being someone who is pursuing wealth and become someone through whom wealth naturally flows. That shift doesn't happen through more practice. It happens through a single, clear, irrevocable decision about who you actually are. And when it lands, really lands, not as a concept but as a lived reality, everything else in this book stops being something you have to remember to do. It becomes simply who you are. Your challenge, tomorrow, pick one recurring task, something ordinary, something you usually do on autopilot, and do it with complete, deliberate presence. Check the state you're in before you begin. Speak about it and around it as someone who already operates from abundance. Give it more than it requires. And notice, actually notice, how the quality of the outcome shifts when the quality of the consciousness behind it shifts. That noticing is the beginning of the identity change that Chapter 9 is about to make permanent. Chapter 9. Becoming the Channel. There is a moment, and if you've been doing the work in this book honestly, you may have already felt it flickering at the edges, when something shifts at a level deeper than thought. Not a new idea, not a better habit, not an upgraded strategy. A change in what you fundamentally understand yourself to be. Up until that moment, even the most diligent student of these principles is still, at the core, a seeker. Someone in pursuit of wealth. Someone working toward abundance. Someone applying techniques to attract what they don't yet have. The seeker is admirable. The seeker is doing the work. But the seeker carries a hidden premise in everything they do, a premise so embedded it's almost invisible. The wealth is out there. I am here. My job is to close the gap. That premise, however unconscious, keeps the gap alive. Because as long as you define yourself as someone pursuing supply, you are simultaneously defining supply as something separate from you. And what is separate must be chased. And chasing, as we established in Chapter 1, is the one posture guaranteed to keep the thing you want perpetually just ahead of you. The transformation this chapter is about is the end of the chase. The seeker and the channel, what actually separates them? The seeker and the channel can look identical from the outside. Same work ethic, same vision, same practices, same language. The difference is entirely internal, and it is absolute. The seeker acts in order to receive. The channel acts as an expression of what already flows through them. The seeker's wealth is contingent, dependent on outcomes, on the cooperation of circumstances, on the validation of results. When things go well, the seeker feels confirmed. When things stall, the seeker feels cut off. The channel's wealth is not contingent on anything external. It is an expression of what they fundamentally are, an opening through which the infinite intelligence of the thinking substance moves into the world in the form of ideas, creations, connections, and value. Results are the downstream evidence of that flow. They are not its source. This is not a subtle distinction. It is the difference between a man hauling water in buckets, exhausting, finite, dependent on his own effort, and a man who has found the spring and simply opened the pipe. Same water, completely different relationship to it. What the identity shift actually requires. Let's not dress this up. The identity shift from seeker to channel requires something most people are genuinely reluctant to do. It requires you to stop defining yourself by your current circumstances. Not to ignore them. Not to pretend they don't exist, but to refuse, at the most fundamental level of self-definition, to let them be the final word on who you are and what flows through you. Right now, your nervous system has a story about you. It was written by years of experiences, disappointments, wins, losses, comparisons, and inherited beliefs. That story has a character, the one you call me, and that character has a specific relationship with money, with success, with ease, with receiving. Most people live inside that story so completely that they cannot imagine an alternative. The character is just who they are. Fixed, established, proven by the evidence of their life so far. Wattles looked at this with the quiet devastation of someone who understood exactly what it cost. He wrote that poverty is not a condition of circumstance, it is a condition of awareness. And changing the circumstance without changing the awareness produces temporary results that inevitably revert to the baseline of the old identity. You've seen this. The person who receives an unexpected windfall and is broke again within 2 years. The business that scales past its founder's internal ceiling and then inexplicably collapses back to the level where the founder feels safe. The relationship that reaches a depth of intimacy the person's nervous system can't hold and quietly self-destructs. The outer world doesn't just reflect the inner world once. It keeps reflecting it, continuously, persistently, until the inner world changes at the level of identity, not just belief, not just habit, but the fundamental sense of what is natural, normal, and inevitable for someone like you. The decision that precedes everything. There is a specific moment that every person who has made this shift can point to, even if they can't always describe it clearly. It is the moment they made a decision. Not a resolution. Not a goal. Not a commitment to try harder or believe more consistently. A decision, in the precise sense of the word, which comes from the Latin decidere, to cut off. To cut off the identity of the seeker. To cut off the story of lack as something that belongs to you. To cut off the idea that the wealth you're moving toward is something other than an expression of what you already, inherently, essentially are. That decision is not dramatic. It doesn't arrive with music and revelation. It is quiet. It is almost shockingly simple. It sounds like, I am a channel. Supply flows through me. That is not a goal I'm working toward. That is what I am. And then living from that declaration, not when it feels true, not when the evidence supports it, but always, especially when nothing around you reflects it yet. This is the hardest and the most important work in the entire book. Not because it requires enormous effort. It requires the opposite. It requires the willingness to release the effortful identity of the striver and accept, without needing to earn it, the identity of the channel. For most people, that acceptance is the most uncomfortable thing they will ever do. Why receiving is harder than working. Here is a truth that explains more about human financial patterns than almost any economic theory. Most people are significantly more comfortable giving than receiving. They can work endlessly. They can produce, serve, deliver, hustle, contribute, without limit. But when abundance arrives, when money flows in unexpectedly, when someone offers significant generosity, when ease appears where struggle was expected, something constricts. The throat tightens. The mind searches for the catch. The body wants to give it back or give it away before it can be taken. This is the receiving wound, and it runs very deep. It is the subconscious conviction that you do not deserve to be a recipient of abundance without having suffered sufficiently for it. That ease is suspicious. That large amounts of good coming your way must be balanced by an equally large account of pain somewhere. The channel identity requires healing this wound directly, not by analyzing it endlessly, but by practicing reception, by letting good things arrive without immediately deflecting them, by sitting with abundance, even briefly, without immediately converting it into productivity or giving it away to prove you're not greedy. Wattles understood this. He taught that the person who cannot receive gracefully cannot be a full channel, because a channel works in both directions. It allows flow in as naturally as it allows flow out. The moment you can receive money, praise, ease, opportunity, with the same relaxed, grateful openness that you give, you have completed the channel. And a complete channel, operating in alignment, in faith, in gratitude, in deliberate action, becomes a force that the thinking substance fills continuously and inexhaustibly. The channel in the world. Let's be concrete about what this identity looks like in practice. Because the channel is not a passive mystic sitting in quiet contemplation waiting for the universe to deposit wealth into their lap. The channel is fully engaged in the world. They work. They create. They build. They serve. They make decisions, take risks, navigate uncertainty. But the quality of that engagement is different. The channel walks into a room and their dominant internal broadcast is not what can I get here but what can flow through me here. They are not scanning for advantage. They are scanning for where their particular creative energy, their ideas, their vision, their genuine value, can find expression. The channel doesn't negotiate from fear of losing. They negotiate from the settled certainty of someone who knows their value and knows there is more supply available if this particular deal doesn't align. The channel doesn't make decisions based primarily on what they can afford right now. They make decisions based on alignment with the vision, trusting that supply organizes itself around aligned decisions rather than fearful ones. The channel doesn't hoard their best ideas, their most powerful insights, their most valuable knowledge, fearing that giving it away depletes their supply. They pour it out freely, knowing that creative intelligence is not a finite resource. The more you express it, the more flows in to replace it. This is what it looks like to move through the world as a channel. Not passive, not naive, not detached from practicality. Fully present, fully engaged, fully active, from a foundation of identity so stable that circumstances cannot shake it. The compound effect of identity. Here is the final mechanism you need to understand, and it is perhaps the most motivating truth in the entire book. Identity compounds. Every day you live from a channel identity, every action taken from alignment, every moment of gratitude, every instance of genuine creative expression, every act of graceful receiving, reinforces the neural pathways, the energetic patterns, and the relationship with the thinking substance that make that identity more and more your natural resting state. In the beginning, it requires conscious effort to return to the channel identity when fear and scarcity try to pull you back into the old story. The gap between where you are and where you're choosing to be from is wide and requires deliberate bridging. But it narrows. Week by week, month by month, the channel identity becomes less something you choose and more something you simply are. The frequency of abundance stops being an aspiration and starts being the background hum of your actual experience. And from that place, from the stable, unforced, naturally aligned identity of the channel, the outer world does something remarkable. It stops resisting you. Not because life becomes problem-free, not because circumstances are always cooperative, but because your relationship with circumstances fundamentally changes. They become clay rather than verdict, temporary configurations of form rather than permanent definitions of what's possible for you. Wattles wrote that the man who truly understands his nature as a channel for the thinking substance can never again be truly poor, not because hardship becomes impossible, but because the identity from which he responds to hardship makes poverty, as a permanent condition, as a destiny, as an identity, simply unavailable to him. That is the inheritance of the channel. And it is yours the moment you decide, clearly, finally, irrevocably, to claim it. One chapter remains. You've done the work. The lie is dismantled. The field is understood. The frequency is clean. The competitive mind is quieted. The vision is precise. The faith is operational. The gratitude is alive. The actions are aligned. The identity is claimed. There is one thing left. The deepest truth of everything Wattles taught, the one that reframes not just your relationship with money, but your relationship with life itself. It is the truth that money was never the point. That wealth, in the truest sense of the word, is not a number in an account. It is a state of being, a quality of consciousness, a way of moving through existence that transforms everything it touches, not because of what it produces, but because of what it expresses. Chapter 10 is the final word, the one that everything in this book was building toward. It is called the true currency, and it will change what you think you've been chasing this whole time. Your challenge: write one sentence, just one, that defines who you are in relation to money and supply. Not who you're becoming. Who you are. Present tense. Identity level. Then read it every morning for 7 days and notice what shifts, not in your circumstances, but in the quality of aliveness you bring to them. That quality is the channel opening. And once it opens fully, nothing in your outer world can stay the same. Chapter 10. The True Currency. You picked up this book because you wanted more money. Be honest. That's why you're here. The title promised effortless wealth. The chapters delivered principles, practices, and a complete reconstruction of how you relate to abundance, creation, and the invisible field underlying all of it. But somewhere around chapter 8 or 9, if you were paying close attention, something started to feel different about the goal itself. The money was still real. The desire was still legitimate. But it started to feel like, not the point, like a downstream effect of something far more fundamental that you'd been circling the entire time without naming it directly. That something has a name. And it isn't wealth. It isn't freedom. It isn't security or success or any of the other words we use as proxies for what we actually want. It is consciousness. Expanded, aligned, creative, unafraid consciousness. That is the true currency. And everything else, the money, the opportunities, the ease, the life that looks like the vision you constructed in Chapter 5, is simply its natural expression. What you were actually chasing. Think back to the version of you that started Chapter 1. What did you actually want when you said you wanted more money? Not the money itself. Money is paper and digits, inert and meaningless without a human consciousness to give it purpose. What did you want that you believed the money would give you? Freedom, most likely. The specific freedom that comes from not having to make decisions out of fear. The ability to choose your work, your time, your relationships, your environment, not based on what you can afford, but based on what genuinely aligns with who you are and what you are here to create. Peace, perhaps. The settled, quiet ease of someone who is not haunted by the low-grade anxiety of scarcity, who wakes up without the first thought being a financial calculation, whose nervous system is not permanently braced for impact. Expression. The capacity to pour your genuine creative energy into work that matters, without the distortion of desperation, without the compromise of doing things you don't believe in because the fear of losing is louder than the desire to create. Aliveness. The particular quality of presence that comes from moving through life as the channel you became in Chapter 9, fully engaged, fully creative, fully in the current of a life that feels like it's being lived rather than endured. None of those things are money. Money is the form they sometimes take in a physical world that uses it as a medium of exchange. But the substance, the actual desired experience, is consciousness. It is the quality of being that underlies the financial condition. Wattles understood this from the beginning. It is why his book was never, at its core, a financial manual. It was a consciousness manual. The wealth was always the side effect of the real work. The mirror that money is. Wattles wrote something in the closing pages of his work that most readers pass over because it doesn't feel as immediately actionable as the earlier chapters. He wrote that money is a mirror. Not a metaphor. A mirror. A precise reflection of the dominant consciousness of the person holding it. The person operating from scarcity consciousness holds money tightly, loses it anxiously, and recreates lack even when windfalls arrive, because their relationship with supply is governed by fear, and fear is not a frequency that wealth can inhabit for long. The person operating from abundance consciousness holds money lightly, deploys it decisively, and finds that it returns, often through entirely unexpected channels, because their relationship with supply is governed by the certainty of the channel. They are not clutching the water. They are the pipe. The implication is radical. You do not need to fix your finances. You need to fix your consciousness. The finances will take care of themselves, because they always have been, and always will be, a reflection of the inner world rather than a cause of it. This is not a comfortable conclusion for people who prefer external solutions. It is far easier to blame the economy, the market, the competition, the algorithm, the system, than to accept that the primary variable in your financial reality is the quality of consciousness you bring to it every single day. But discomfort and truth frequently occupy the same space. And this particular truth, once genuinely accepted, is the most liberating thing a human being can encounter, because it means the power was always yours. It was never out there. It was never dependent on circumstances cooperating, competitors retreating, or luck arriving at the right moment. It was always the consciousness behind the action that determined the result. The wealth that cannot be taken. Here is the gift that lives on the other side of everything this book has asked you to do. There is a form of wealth that no market crash can erase. No bad decision can permanently destroy. No competitor can steal. No circumstance, however brutal, can ultimately take from you. It is the wealth of aligned consciousness, the wealth of knowing, at a level below thought, that you are a channel for infinite supply, that the source is real, responsive, and never exhausted, that your ability to create value, generate ideas, serve genuinely, and move through the world in alignment with the creative intelligence of the universe is not contingent on anything external. That wealth is who you become through the practice of everything in this book. And it is permanent in a way that money, on its own, never is. Wattles watched people make and lose fortunes throughout his era. He noticed that the ones who rebuilt quickly, who were back to prosperity within months of a catastrophic loss, were invariably the ones whose wealth had come from consciousness rather than circumstance. They hadn't just accumulated money. They had become the kind of person through whom money naturally flows. And becoming does not become. Lose the money and keep the consciousness, and the money returns. It must, because the channel is open. Lose the consciousness and keep the money, and the money eventually goes, because the channel is closed, and what fills a closed pipe eventually finds another exit. The true work was never the accumulation. It was the becoming. The life on the other side. Let's paint the picture clearly. Because this book asked a great deal of you, it dismantled comfortable beliefs, confronted real patterns, demanded a level of honest self-examination that is genuinely uncomfortable, and you deserve to see what you've been building toward. The life on the other side of this work is not a life without challenges. Wattles never promised that. The creative mind is not protected from difficulty. It is simply not destroyed by it. It is a life in which you wake up without the weight of scarcity pressing on your chest before your eyes are fully open, where the first thought is not a calculation of what you might lose but a quiet orientation toward what you're building. A life in which work feels different, not always easy, sometimes deeply demanding, but never futile, because you understand that every action taken in alignment compounds toward the outcome that is already, in the invisible, underway. A life in which money moves differently. Not always abundantly by the world's definition, but consistently, because the channel is open and the signal is clean and the field is organized around the dominant frequency you've committed to holding. A life in which other people's success feels genuinely good to you, where the win of someone in your field confirms your own supply rather than threatening it, where the competitive mind has lost its grip entirely and creation has become your natural language. A life in which you are, in the truer sense of the word, free, not because you have a specific number in the bank, but because your relationship with supply is no longer governed by fear. And a person not governed by fear moves through the world with a quality of aliveness that money alone has never and will never purchase. That is what Wattles was pointing at in every page of his work. Not a technique for getting rich, a pathway for becoming free. The final instruction. Wattles ended his masterwork with characteristic directness. No grand flourish. No emotional crescendo. Just the quiet authority of a man who had found something true and wanted to make sure you didn't miss it. He said, in essence, begin now. Not when conditions are better. Not when the fear is quieter. Not when you feel ready, because ready is a feeling that scarcity consciousness manufactures to keep you stationary. Now, with the vision you have, with the faith you're developing, with the gratitude you're practicing, with the identity you're claiming, with the consciousness you're building, imperfectly, daily, persistently. Begin the life of the channel now. Because the thinking substance does not respond to future tense intention. It responds to present tense commitment. And the moment you commit, fully, irrevocably, with your whole consciousness, the invisible machinery of creation begins to move. It was always ready. The only question was whether you were. The thread that ran through everything. 10 chapters. 1 thread. You do not earn abundance. You do not deserve it through suffering. You do not unlock it through hustle or strategy or the right connections or the perfect timing. You become it. You align with it. You think it, feel it, speak it, act from it, and eventually, gradually, then suddenly, you embody it so completely that the outer world has no choice but to reflect it back to you in the form of money, opportunity, ease, and the particular quality of life that looks, from the outside, like extraordinary luck. It is not luck. It is law. The same law that turns seeds into forests and thoughts into empires, and a quiet man's forgotten book into a principle that still reverberates through human lives more than a century after it was written. You summon this book into your life at exactly the right moment. Now summon the rest. You do not get rich by doing certain things. You get rich by doing things in a certain way. Wallace D. Wattles, 1910. You now know the certain way. Go build something worthy of it.